Trigger warnings, safe spaces, speech codes, Halloween dress codes, mandatory social justice training and consent classes, no platforming speakers and protests, all part of modern university campus culture. Do they have any time for actual study? And what about free speech? You know, that thing that's kind of essential to open and free inquiry. Well, most universities pay lip service to the idea, but how much do they really believe in it? And how can you find out? So in my last video, I talked about Jonathan Haidt's Heterodox Academy and specifically talked about the Heterodox Guide to Colleges, where they rate the top 150 universities in the United States. Now in Canada, they have the Campus Freedom Index that ranks universities according to the policies and practices of both the university administration and the student union. In the UK, they have the Spiked Online Free Speech University Rankings. Like the Campus Freedom Index in Canada, their system looks at the policies and practices of both university administrators and student unions. And then they give each university a traffic light: green good, amber not so good, and red bad. And in Australia, well, surprise, surprise, we don't have anything. But fortunately, Matthew Lesh of the Institute of Public Affairs did conduct such a survey of Australian universities and compiled an extensive 55-page report back in May 2016. Lesh's method combines the rating systems developed for the American Foundation for Individual Rights in Education's annual spotlight on speech codes, which, as mentioned yesterday, makes up part of the Heterodox Academy's rating system, and the aforementioned Spiked Free Speech University rankings from the UK. Lesh uses the same traffic light method as Spike to rate universities. So for a green rating, the institution, quote, is one that has no policies and has taken no action that threatens campus expression. An amber institution is one that maintains policies that could be interpreted to restrict speech, though the exact impact on the free speech depends on how the policy is implemented, or there have been unsuccessful actions taken by either university administrators or students to limit the diversity of ideas on campus. And a red institution is one that actively restricts free speech on campus through policies that either clearly and substantially restrict speech or alternatively has taken action that limits the diversity of ideas. And so based on those criteria, how did Australian universities fare? Well, of the 42 Australian universities, 33 or 79% received a red rating, 8 or 19% an amber rating, and just one university in Australia received a green ranking. Breaking it down, 67% were rated red on policy and 21% on actions. And obviously there's some overlap, hence why the total is 79%. And in case you were wondering which university was rated green, it's the University of New England. And also of interest is that Australia's top 10 rated universities, according to Times World Rankings, all get a red rating from the Free Speech Index. So let's have a look at some example policies that earn some institutions a red rating. So harassment and bullying policies are all the rage these days, and at Murdoch University, the bylaws state that assault and abuse includes insulting language or offensive behaviour and fines people $50 a pop for every offence. And as Lesh notes, and is obvious to anyone with a functioning brain cell, offensive speech is in the eye of the beholder. What you find offensive, others may not, and puts you in the unfortunate position of having to be a mind reader. Or worse still, everyone becomes too frightened to open their mouths or have an opinion. Federation University's bullying prevention statement includes hurting another person's feelings. And the University of Queensland and the University of Western Sydney forbid sarcasm on campus. What a bunch of killjoys. Moving on to policies around internet usage and social media, the prestigious Monash University social media policy states, quote, When using social media in the context of educational research training and when making identifiable personal use of social media, students must not make any comment or post material that is or might be construed to be racial or sexual harassment, offensive, obscene, including pornography, defamatory, discriminatory towards any person, or inciting hate. What is particularly bad about this is the threshold of might be construed to be. I'm sure that won't be abused by the easily offended. Bond University's social media policy forbids students from making offensive comments on the internet, and the Notre Dame Student Guide prohibits students from creating or exchanging messages that are offensive, harassing, obscene, or threatening. But again, who's going to decide what's offensive or obscene? I mean, is a Pepe meme going to qualify? And then we get to the language toolkits and guidelines. Notice how they try to make it sound innocuous and helpful by calling it a toolkit instead of what it actually is, a draconian speech code. So there are the politically correct guidelines such as those from the University of Wollongong instructing students to avoid using words like man, manpower, man-made, even though anything worth making throughout history was probably made by a man, sportsmanlike, or groundsman. And not to be outdone, the University of Western Australia forbids occupational descriptions such as craftsman, founding father, spokesman, tradesman, workman, and mankind. I wonder if Mother Nature's been banned. I mean, surely that's sexist, although it doesn't have the word man in it, does it? So it's probably fine. Now, this one made the news when it was discovered last year, when the University of New South Wales stated that it is inappropriate to say Captain Cook discovered Australia, and that it's more appropriate to say Australia was invaded, colonised, or occupied. But this is probably my personal favourite. Apparently it is inappropriate to say that Aboriginal people have lived in Australia for 40,000 years, but rather it must be said the Indigenous Australians have been here since the beginning of the dreaming. As Lesh notes, this prioritises spiritual understanding over historic fact. How's this any different from saying that humans have been here since the time of Adam and Eve, so we don't offend the creationists? Now let's look at some of the actions universities have taken to shut people up. I mean, protect helpless victims from stuff they don't like. So, for example, the proposed Australian Consensus Centre at the University of Western Australia, led by Danish author and environmentalist Bjorn Lomborg, which was supposed to focus on rational economic analysis of global issues to deliver sensible policy solutions. Well, that was met with a concerted campaign against the centre by both academics and students because Lomborg, whilst being an environmentalist, doesn't buy into the alarmist nature of a lot of the debate around that new religion of climate change. Even the Dalai Lama was banned from Sydney University until they were forced to reverse the decision via public outrage. And a bunch of universities banned talks by Muslim speakers on topics such as terrorism and Gaza. Now, these guys' views are out there, but if students aren't exposed to them, how can they make informed opinions? And the University of Melbourne removed Liberal students for displaying a poster of former Prime Minister John Howard saying, "We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come." Of course, they were labelled racist, because of course they were. And then there's the now infamous 18C case involving students from the University of Queensland that were taken to court for expressing opposition to the existence of a computer lab reserved for Aboriginal students exclusively, which ultimately backfired spectacularly. And if you want to know more about that, click the link in the top right-hand corner. Then Lesh goes on to document various Liberal Party politicians that have been protested and physically confronted, as well as Liberal student delegates that were prevented from speaking at the National Union of Students Conference in 2015. And when some of them actually did get a turn to speak, they were shouted down. He also mentions the increasing popularity of trigger warnings and safe spaces, and it seems various student newspapers already include trigger warnings in their articles. So that's just a taste of what can be found in the report. If you really want to work yourself up into a rage, by all means, go and read the full report. Link in the description. So what to do about it? Well, I don't think students are going to boycott universities. Even if you're against campus censorship, you'll probably grin and bear it if you have your mind set on a particular university course at a particular university. And I'm loath to get the government involved in the running of a private institution. However, as Lesh notes, government provides the vast majority of funding to universities. It is appropriate for the government to encourage universities to fulfil their educational mission and protect freedom of speech. Spot on, except that you have to get the government interested in protecting free speech in the first place. To date, they've only made platitudinal statements in that direction, declaring that they have bigger priorities. But the problem with that line of thinking is that if you don't have free speech in the first place, then you won't have other priorities to worry about.